חליצה, קום קרא אליו, יחיש לאמצע, נשמת כל חי, וגם נעריצה, אכול בשמחה, כי כבר רצה. שמי שמיים, ארץ וימים, כל צבא מרום, גויים ורבים, תנין ואדם, וחיית רעים, הביאה השם, צור עולמי, במשנה לכם, אוי וקידוש רבה, ברוב מטעמים, לרוח נדיבה, יזכו לרב טוב, המתענגים בה, בביאת גואל, לחיי העולם הבא. שמי שמיים, ארץ וימים, כל צבא מרום, גויים ורמים, תנין ואדם, וחיית רעים, הביאה השם, צור עולמי. מה ידידות מנוחתך, עד שבת המלכה, וכן נרוץ לקראתך, בואי חלה נסוכה. לבוש בגדי חמודות, לילה לילה לילה, להדליק נר בברכה, לילה לילה לילה, ותחל כל העבודות, לילה לילה לילה, לא תעשו מלאכה, לילה לילה לילה, להתענג בתענוגים, ברבורים וסלב ודגים, מערב מזמינים כל מיני מטעמים, מבעוד יום מוכנים תרנגולים מפותמים, ולערוך כמה מינים, לילה לילה לילה, שתות יינות מבוסמים, לילה לילה לילה, וטפנוקי מעדנים, לילה לילה לילה, בכל 3 פעמים, לילה לילה לילה, להתענג בתענוגים, ברבורים וסלב ודגים. נחלת יעקב יירש, בלי מצר עם נחלה, ויכבדו השיר ורש, ותזעקו לי גאולה. יום שבת אם תשמרו, לילה לילה לילה, והייתם לי סגולה, לילה לילה לילה, 6 ימים תעבודו, לילה לילה לילה, ובשביעי נגילה, לילה לילה לילה, להתענג בתענוגים, ברבורים וסלב ודגים, חפציך אסורים, וגם לחשוב חשבונות, הרהורים מותרים, ולשדך הבנות, תינוק ללמדו ספר, לילה לילה לילה, למנצח בנגינות, לילה לילה לילה, ולהגות באמרי שפר, לילה לילה לילה, בכל פינות ומחנות, לילה לילה לילה. להתענג בתענוגים, ברבורים וסלב ודגים. הילוכך יהי ונחת, עונג קרא לשבת, והשינה משובחת, כדת נפש משיבת. בחנפשי לחרגה, לילה לילה לילה, ולנוח בחיבת, לילה לילה לילה, כשושנים סוגה, לילה לילה לילה, בו ינוחו בנובת, לילה לילה לילה, להתענג בתענוגים, ברבורים וסלב ודגים. בין עולם הבא, יום שבת מנוחה, כל המתענגים בה, יזכו לרוב שמחה. בחבלי משיח, לילה לילה לילה, יוצלו לרווחה, לילה לילה לילה, בדורתנו תצמיח, לילה לילה לילה, ונשאו יגון והנחה, לילה לילה לילה, להתענג בתענוגים, ברבורים וסלב ודגים. יום זה לישראל אורה ושמחה, אורה ושמחה, שבת מנוחה. יום זה לישראל אורה ושמחה, שבת שבת מנוחה, שבת שבת מנוחה. צבית הפיקודים במעמד הר סיני, שבת ומועדים לשמור בכל שני, לערוך לפני מעשה דברוכה, שבת שבת מנוחה, שבת שבת מנוחה. חמדת הלבבות ואומה שבורה, בלי נפשות נכרעות נשמה יתרה, לנפש מצרה תשימנה, שבת שבת מנוחה, שבת שבת מנוחה. Just want
to form one or two people to study starting. Just give me a second.
Shabbat Melucha. באיסור מלאכה ציוויתנו לא רע. הזכהוד מלוכה עם שבת אשמורה, הקריב שי למורה, מנחה מרקחה, שבת שבת מנוחה, שבת שבת מנוחה.
Alrighty. Let's get down to business here. And pop music, this reminds me of my Shabbath, especially going to my favorite family of all, the Sunshines. Unfortunately, the husband died about like that. Is like a mother to me, is still alive. My favorite people in Jerusalem, if not the entire world. Anyway, all these. Oh, you just bring mode here. We back down into have a bit today, but oh, that's life. The Torah window. There we go. And okay, so the book, also known as Parsha Vayechi, and focused on this time, as I mentioned, during study somehow overlook the importance of this place in three of our focused on Bethel that we need on. So let's do. We're going to go back to chapter 7. And let's see where we're up to. Yaakov had made Joseph swear that he would take his bones out of Egypt and bury them in the Ma'ara, Asher B'Sadeh Machpelah, the cave that's in the field of called the Ma'ara, the Machpelah. Many people think the word Machpelah refers to, but it doesn't. The cave is in the Sadeh of Ephron, Sadeh Ephron Hachiti, the Sadeh, and an area Machpelah. So the area itself, like Machpelah or there's two, one. Others are buried in another level. I should say that Machpelah from the word root kafal, pay to be multiplication is use that root. Say it's the same root, but that seems to be incorrect. I don't know where the comes from. That's the area of and Torah. That's what it's called. Okay, so the where Jacob is, the entire Tanakh, which is the reversing of the firstborn with someone who's not firstborn. Esav was the firstborn. In the end, Yaakov acquired the Bechorah and was blessed by after being tricked by Yaakov under the guidance of Rivka, under the guidance of his mother, and was born in Russia. Instead, the status of firstborn is really given to Yosef. Yaakov was not, even though Yosef was not the firstborn of Yaakov, Yosef was the firstborn of Yaakov with his real wife, shall we say, Rachel. And so, in a certain sense, one could claim this. But he is given the firstborn double portion, where we find out a portion now. How is he given a portion? The purposes Yaakov's two grandchildren, elevated direct children of Yaakov when talking about land inheritance, almost like the two. If I can get this, I didn't switch. So if this is Yaakov and these are his 12 children down here, third level, then these two are moved up one level and the place instead. So they along the same direct children of, and they're each tribal in their own individual in Israel. Joseph Yaakov effectively gives the double inheritance reserved firstborn, the one who gets double. Joseph is essentially made born and is not thrown for with Pokemon, which is barely mentioned in passing, but then it's referred to here again. So now we end up in Menachem in that place again. Or so we have in Yaakov generation. We have okay. Yaakov, the born becomes the second born. You can even go high, and yet it's who is basically treated as the firstborn. Then Esav was the firstborn of Yaakov, inheriting as the first. And is the firstborn of Yaakov, ends up inheriting the Doshans. Menashe, firstborn of, and yet Ephraim ends up if he's. We have the king of the firstborn. Okay. So here we are. We're in Genesis chapter 48, verse 1. ויהי אחרי הימים האלה, ויאמר יוסף, ייקח את שני בניו עמו, את מנשה ואת Ephraim. So Joseph visited his sons, or Ephraim. Menashe mentioned first. ויגל ליעקב ויאמר, הנה בנך יוסף בא, Jacob regains his strength and sits up to meet his Sons of Yosef. So Shaddai. Yet, although he's called the patriarch's called Yahweh many times, it would seem, and I have to be completely honest to understand how what's going on there. Right, Nirai, so Luz is Bethel, Be'eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan, עצמי, נתתיך לקהל עמים ונתתי את הארץ הזאת לזרעך אחריך אחוזת עולם. And he said to me, and I will multiply you. Notice this is repetition blessed from Genesis. One or chapter 1. Before this is I can say, but it's harkening back original. In the Garden of Eden, okay? I will make you fruitful, and I will multiply you. It'll be the people in form of an intransitive verb. Yeah, it's a transitive or causative verb in the second case. I will make you fruitful. And I will make you into a congregation of nations. Again, yes, so this morning we spoke about it, and we'll see in a second. One of the tribes. Natati et haaretz hazot lezaracha, and I will give this land to your seed. Lezaracha, as a friend of mine who prefers to remain anonymous, but who is very insightful when it comes to Torah, always says whenever it says lezaracha, it's talking about male, because zera is the same word in biblical Hebrew for your seed. The line that's passed generation from sperm to sperm. We know sperm yes, right. The sperm can either have an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. The egg has an X chromosome, and the chromosome meets with another. It's a with the next one that a female. The sperm and the eggs are haploid cells, meaning they only have one set of chromosomes. They're not doubled. And then the zygote is a diploid cell, which has both. So, so to make sure is the characteristic other down from sun Y found in the zeta, and is corresponding Y chromosome that cover the other editing of genes that may occur through random or process of the son of the father. Okay, and there will only be one Y chromosome in a male. There will be 0 Y chromosomes in a female, which has 2 chromosomes. And this is high the You know that the male characteristics, or the, let's say, the essence of the father, is passed down to the son. Seed. This is Lizaracha. It's talking about the patrilineal line. So the patrilineal, your patrilineal proceed after inheritance. Inheritance descendants of Yaakov. Oh, but what about the daughters of Tzalachad? Right? Well, the daughters of Tzalachad were placeholders. They were the from the, it then went to the husbands when they married them. That's why they were required to marry within the same tribe. The daughters of Tzalachad were married on tribe. It's passed down through to the doesn't go outside through the father's son. Even more in the patrilineal descent. Okay, the daughters of Tzalachad. Aside, not taking into fact of revisionists who try to interpret the Torah in a kind of feminist way, it's actually the opposite. And the Tzalachad are placeholder, right? If you read this story carefully, then you'll see that's what's implied there. It's actually an anti-feminist story, I would say. Okay, Achuzat Ulam is an internal inheritance. Verse 4. Guatemala. Now from Guatemala. Shalom, shalom. Shabbat shalom, everyone else. Okay. 5. And behold, or now, you're two. So this Yaakov says to, sorry, I have a cold. This is what Yaakov says, and now you're the two sons been born. Ad boy alecha, before I came to you. In Egypt, and this is what should move up one level to be considered like the sons in place of Yosef. Comes represent his two sons, both under Yaakov. So it's almost like Yaakov now has 13 sons. Ephraim and Manasseh, back down to tribes. When would anybody like to say it's really only 12 tribes in the end? Inheritance in the land. Excuse me 1 second. I'm just going to get. One is in the land, and that is the Levite, no inheritance. The Leviticus. In the end, there are effectively 12 tribes because the Levi is tribes. So inheritance of or of tribes are in and directly around the Mishkan, the tabernacle. It's so essentially, say it all depends on that. You can count sons of Yaakov, or they would in Manasseh, or sons of Yaakov, direct sons of Yaakov, and they each receive their own status as tribes. Or you can then again 12 tribes doesn't have land, and his land is God is the tackle with the tackle, and then he has within tribes tribe. So let's talk about 12 tribes. It's go to the text. I should be sharing the text. I'm doing that. I've got to go. Okay, and we are in okay, so we're in verse. So two sons that were born to you before I came here, Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh, Reuven, Shimon, Manasseh, like Reuven and Shimon were Yaakov's first two born sons through Reuven was his spot as dog first soon. Shimon and Levi were a lots apparently for what they did in Shem. Shimon were in the blessing that we'll see in a second. We're also thrown off theirs. So after sleeping with Bilha from the Torah, from the line one, are thrown off. Also, apparently we did. So it appears that Reuven loses the spot, moves into the spot, and more taking over for any could that Yosef that is not or really is the first. Did not the other wife and the other two concubines. He was them, right? But he was the plan. To marry only Rachel, the one he fell in with. Rachel's for Joseph. We could see why Ephraim and Manasseh are elevated to that spot. But you can be born, but then that doesn't work because after Yehuda is kind of given a after you basically the see the blessing. So you could say God, in a sense, conspired to do what was to the top dogs. The first boy, his beloved, already dead. Point long time. Of Israel. When he was on his way back to his father Yitzchak's house, and Reuven and Shimon, those would have been the two top dogs, but now it's Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay, verse 6. And if anybody has questions, them in, and we will try to relate to them, or come on to the StreamYard stream, which I posted description, come live into the study, and that's really the best way. And when we do it, I'd like to have a Shabbat Shalom, Reuven, or a Raven. I thought it was Reuven, but it's Raven. Maybe you're here, call yourself Raven. So here we are. We're in verse 6. We're in Genesis chapter 48, verse 6. Ilcha yi'u al shem achem yikarahu And excuse me, once again, I have a bit of a cold, so you'll have to excuse me. We've seen the word moladetecha before, and it usually means place. Abraham is told to leave his father, Terah, from your land, from your birthplace. House of your father. But in this case, it doesn't place. This made me think of something. See, okay. So, I always thought of moladetecha. So here's the verse. And Yoah said to Avram, Lech lecha translated, but here the KJV at least translates it as your kindred, your relatives. Maybe other translations do the same. Let's see what I can click on to get the so they do translate moladetecha as your kindred, your family. This is consistent. Kindred. Now, let me check. Oops, Robert Abrams. Let's see what he has to say. I guess he's going to agree. And this is good for me because a lot of times I realize I have certain preconceived notions or understanding. So let's see. That's Genesis 12. I'm just check two other translations. Altar. See. See, I learn something new every time and pretend everything. Some here. I notice when I study Torah constantly that I catch myself learning something new or finding a mistake that I'd said in the past, understanding it. So I'd always thought moladetecha in that verse in Genesis, that more place doesn't seem to be. Okay. What's happening here? Oh, I think I know what's happening. I know, I'm logged out of this. I'm logged out. So, okay, just give me 1 second to log back in here. Oh, Maritza. Ariella, welcome, Maritza.
Hello. Shalom.
Hello. Shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom. Where are you from, Maritza?
I'm from Dominican Republic, but I live in Colombia, Medellin, Colombia.
Okay. I can't
Thank you.
hear Maria. I'm saying you must be a friend of Ariella's.
Sure, she's my sister.
Okay, very, very excellent. Just let's see how we're going to do this. Okay, 1 second. I just log back. That's what's happening. Okay. I just got this book, so back on. What is going on? Yeah. Nice. All right, just 1 second, please. Okay, 1 second. Boy, the cold. Open up again, and now it should work. Yeah. It's time. Just give me 1 second. Apologize. Listen to this. There we go. Okay. So we're going to 12. I'll share the screen again now. Let's go to Genesis 12. I'm going to do share screen. There we go. So now we go to Genesis 12. Maritza, I'm going to ask you to move. And if you want, then meantime, creating, so these microphone. Okay, so 12, there we go. Go forth and all translates the Torah on here. It's kind of crazy. Your birthplace. That's interesting. So this is translated here as birthplace. Abraham here, Robert all one here notation of the genealogy. The preceding passage comes and it begins the article narrative. When he here addressed himself as yet nothing, only by audience. Name never mentioned for an unspecified place. Observe God's call to Abraham, chapter 1. On the mountain, God will show him rock to draw connection with land, place, like that interpretation. In this is the utterance a little bit. Thus, only sense birthplace, not its occasional sense folk, and its symptom of others, a social unit, and let it appears as of his birth taken out of the folk land place father. So the word moledet means kin or descendants in year 7. Or this is what Robert Alter says. Let's focus this on this. Oh, on Ariella, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. I finally figured out that I have to come in with Chrome rather than my regular browser.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm on myself.
I see Maritza's here with us.
Yes, I
So
am.
this is your.
I have a little problem to hear it, but it's okay.
All right.
We had a big lightning storm and got a bit of a time lag,
Colombia.
I think.
I hear you. How's everything, Ariella?
Oh,
You guys
everything's
are
good.
settling in?
I think it might be better if we just listen to you because there's so much of a time lag in here, but I can type any questions in the chat box.
Okay, perfect. No problem. So we were, okay, so Ariella, if you want to say something, you type in. Get back there. Muted Maritza. We were looking, and I noticed that in 48:6 it says this is now trying to explain how Menashe going to be of his children, other their own status, building sons Menashe and from. And here in verse 6 it says Umoladet or your progeny you give birth to after them, one generation to the status of tribes. Yaakov, the word here moladet or moledet, word, this or but this is used in Genesis 12, where Abraham is told, "Go forth from your country, your people, and your father's house." Let's bring it up here. Oh, and do I have the share? And from your same here in Genesis 12, here this is 46 molad. Okay, so here used in the sense of it's clearly births here in Genesis 12. So this is meaning the place of your birth. Genesis 6, your kin. Translation in Genesis 12 in there it doesn't go from your land from birth out from your first house. Really means your from your and in other words, moladetcha here doesn't mean place of birth. And indeed, the seems that so it's the and your father's household, and so do a lot of the other translations. With who I to a lot, and knowledgeable biblical translator / scholar and see what he says. And what he says is this. So over here, using one the net Hebrew certain usual of birthplace and not occasional. Yeah, here we go. Thus, the moled, Genesis 12, almost the birthplace, not its occasional sense of kin. So what alters is that it can place folk and inferior. Translate Genesis 1, always understood. If you hear 12 verse 1, and your falls to the land I show you. Father's house, meaning in Genesis 1, it means it's similar to and not a sense of which would synonym family social unit. Here. Okay. In 1128, part of Genesis means construct Moladeto is possessive in this case. Moladeto. And here, these two broken out the focus sequence, birthplace, house. Bit edits the top. Okay. Is that Robert Alter is indeed saying that the word moledet can mean either a place or descendant. Moledet comes from the root child, good lamedal, progeny, and so moledet we'd have to do a full study. So in Genesis chapter 4, it clearly means progeny. In Genesis 12, chapter 1, if we look at it, could really mean one. You can make it for either one. For the case for project, because this is me based so your family, your house. I'm curious if there's any place where it's clear. This is ambiguous. It could either mean place or in Genesis 48 clearly means entering if there's any place means birth in where possibly mean. So let's click on Gordon. So Strong's whatever it's worth, birth ring basically gives me I can't be where to oops no and then here's the chord really get to. This look clearly means birth. So edits more that just means birth. 24/4. Yeah, clearly means also mean to my right. Genesis 3. In the way. This is first related bait. Yep. All right. I'm not going to get bogged down here. Just keep it in mind myself at birth. Okay. I've here. But anyway, so Yosef to Yaakov Yosef and says, your kin, who you give to after that, after Menachem, you yours. Well, what is it? Yours? Considered children. They won't get their individual any further. Won't be made in the nation of Israel. They will be under Joseph, which is it, because would have read in questions. I don't think he did because it doesn't mention it anywhere. Joseph. Children. I mean, so let's say if Joseph had other children named, I don't know, the third named tribe to go under Ephraim because he's not a descendant of Ephraim. You couldn't have been up because he's not a descendant of, and Yosef doesn't have in the tribal to have somehow been part of Ephraim or Manasseh, but it and Manasseh. So you have my direct children, in other sons, considered your considered sons. This is the case of inheritance of the land structure own tribes as if they were the direct not sons, but okay. Hakham so here. So he answers that question, right? So Yaakov himself realizes the problem. Is they will, in other words, they will inherit along with their brothers. In other words, one of the tribe, right? Literally, there's I'm here, if that, but maybe it's not saying that. Maybe it's saying that all of the other brothers inherit. But when it says Al Shem Achem, that they will inherit like their brothers, it's Ephraim and Manasseh. Basically, what you that Yosef, and then they will be subsumed to the tribe that would solve them being part of Yosef doesn't have tribe, it's up into Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay. There's Maritza. Maritza, you're back. Okay. So, at any or in Genesis 40, when I came from Padan, Padan is where he was with Laban. Is the state and the main basically on the way to Efrat. And I buried Efrat, which is known as Beit. Okay. That's mentioned. I've already know that. Sorry, I'm sure you already know. Since we're speaking about the grandchildren of Rachel, he's mentioned that. Maybe he wants to talk about. Remember, Joseph's. Into the to mention Yah Yisrael and Yosef, and Israel saw the children of Yosef. Minorities. He mentioned of okay. يومير يعقوب أل يوسف أل شدان يومير ينمي but great doesn't mean, but it means. So I'll translate this as Israel turned his attention to the sons of Yosef and said, "Who are these?" Is that a question? We know it's in the next verse, 2 verses later. He couldn't even split this time. He noticed there. It's interesting. It says he couldn't see, and he saw. He's Joseph. Couldn't see doesn't always mean completely couldn't see, but had trouble seeing. But it certainly is interesting. If you were a rabbinite here, the sons of Yosef, and here in verse 10 it says Israel couldn't see because it's heavy with old age. But this first of all, verse 8, Yah or Yar means tense. It says the sons of Yosef, meaning Ephraim and Manasseh, Yomer Miel says, who are these? Yomer Yosef El Aviv. Or this whole thing could just be kind of a rhetorical question, right? These Yosef wants to, so Yaakov can go on to give the zero, which firstborn, the second one is the first question. I'm curious what Robert Alter has to say about that, because that's an interesting topic. Interesting. This is 8. Oh no, something missing, is it? No. We got 29. Are we? 5, 6, 48. Oh, I'm just curious to see what he says about all of it. So from verse 1, he says, and he took his two sons with him. Joseph, even before he receives any word from his father in this regard, anticipates that Jacob will confer some sort of special eminence on his own two sons in a deathbed blessing, and so he brings them with him. Luz, verse 3, this is the older name for Bethel, where Jacob was vouchsafed. Yeah, we know that. Verse 5, your two sons shall be mine, Ephraim and Manasseh, like Reuben and Shimon shall be mine. So Robert Alter says this is Genesis chapter 48, verse 5, these words are equally fraught with thematic and legal implications. Jacob explicitly equates Joseph's two sons with his own firstborn and secondborn, intimating that the former are to have as good an inheritance or better as the latter, and thus once more invokes the great Genesis theme of the reversal of primogeniture. That's what we were talking about before, that the firstborn becomes the secondborn becomes the firstborn. Note that he already places Ephraim the younger before Manasseh when he names Joseph's sons. The fact that Reuben has violated Jacob's concubine and Shimon with Levi has initiated the massacre at Shechem may suggest that they are deemed unworthy to be undisputed first and second in line among Jacob's inheritors. It's essentially what we said earlier. The language Jacob uses, moreover, is a formula of legal adoption, just as the gesture of placing the boys on the old man's knees is a ritual gesture of adoption. That's a good point. The adoption is dictated by the fact that Ephraim and Manasseh will become tribes, just as if they were sons of Jacob. Verse 6, and those you begot after them. It is difficult to square this phrase with the narrative as we have it, which indicates that Joseph has only two sons. The efforts of some commentators to make the verb a future is not at all warranted by the Hebrew grammar, and in any case, Joseph has been married more than 25 years. That's interesting. So, verse 6. So he's saying here, Holadeta acharehem, your progeny which you gave birth to. So this is in the past tense, or the perfect, shall we say. Acharem licha ihyu. I disagree. I think this could easily be interpreted as a future, not in the way the future is usually stated in Hebrew, but just by context. So it would be, maybe the good translation would be your progeny, which you will have given birth to after them, would be a good way to translate it, perhaps. But Robert also says that implies, this can only imply that the past, and there's no other indication of children. I disagree with his interpretation there, but okay. The efforts of some commentators to make the verb a future is not at all warranted by the Hebrew grammar and anything. Okay, so I disagree with that comment. I think it's a future, not grammatically speaking, but textually speaking. It would be like saying, what would be an example? Let's say I'm going to go have pizza later. I would say, let's say I had 2 slices of pizza now, and I know I'm going to have another slice of pizza later. And I say, these 2 slices of pizza are going to have extra cheese on them, but the third slice of pizza that I will have had won't have extra cheese, or something like that. At any rate, I don't agree with this commentary here. Okay. By their brother's name, they shall be called in their inheritance. Although the idiom is familiar, the meaning is not entirely transparent. What Jacob probably is saying is that it is Ephraim and Manasseh who will have tribal status in the future nation. Right, I agree with that. And thus, any of the sons of Joseph would be called by their name, would have claim to the land that was part of the tribal inheritance of Ephraim and Manasseh, and so designated. That's exactly what we just said right now. So there is a question regarding verse 6. Right, what he means by Shem Achem Yikara'u Benachalatam, literally the name of their brothers, or the name of their brothers, by the name of their brothers they shall be called regarding their inheritance. So is this question what happens with other children that Yosef may have or has had. There's no indication that he already had any other children, will have had. And this is a bit ambiguous, as I mentioned earlier, but my interpretation was that this is saying that any other progeny that's born to Yosef will be subsumed into either the tribe of Ephraim or Manasseh, into the tribe of their brothers, Achaim, and that's exactly here what Robert Alter seems to be saying as well. Seems to be saying that it's ambiguous, but that would claim to land that was part of the tribal inheritance of Manasseh and Ephraim and Manasseh, and so designated. But that's essentially what's going to happen. That any other progeny would inherit within Ephraim or Manasseh. Okay. As for me, when I was coming from Padan, this is now Robert Alter's commentary on Genesis chapter 48, verse 7. When I was coming from Padan, Rachel died. This verse is one of several elements in this chapter that have been seized on by textual critics as evidence of its highly composite nature and what is claimed to be a concomitant incoherence in its articulations. So basically, they're picking up, or some of the commentators, let's say the critical commentators, are basically saying, I'll translate that, what Robert Alter just said, into English. It's basically a claim for the documentary hypothesis that that at least the first two chapters of Genesis, the first chapter of the Old Testament, that Genesis was written by one of two authors, either the J author, the Jehovists, or the E author, the Elohists. And their explanation, remember we picked up on the fact that this verse here, Genesis 48:6, which suddenly mentions 48:7, which suddenly mentions Rachel and doesn't seem to have any practical implication, seems to be a bit out of place. Why does, why does the Torah suddenly mention it? So what Robert Alter is saying is that that those who don't believe that the Torah is divine, or those who accept the documentary hypothesis, are saying that these are two different authors, and that's why, or that these verses, that verse, specifically verse, oops, where'd we go? Close this off. Oops, I closed off the wrong one. Doesn't matter. Close this off too. That verse 7 is written by a different author than the previous verses. Okay? That's what he's saying here. But such conclusions, and then he rejects that. Such conclusions seriously underestimate the degree of integrative narrative logic that the writer, or perhaps one must say the redactor, exhibits. At first glance, Jacob's comment about the death of his beloved Rachel in the midst of blessing his grandson seems a non sequitur. Right? So Robert Alter is rejecting this and saying, no, the explanation is not that verse 7 was written by the E author, whereas Robert Alter does many times quote the documentary hypothesis, and he clearly accepts it. But here he's saying it's not always the case. And of course, I don't accept the documentary hypothesis, and I say all of the so-called non sequiturs can be explained by things along these lines. It is, however, a loss to which he has never been reconciled. Witnesses extravagant favoritism towards Rachel's firstborn. His vivid sense of anguish after all these decades is registered in the single word, alai, to my grief, but literally on me. She died on me. That's what it says there. Same word he uses in 42:36 when he says that all the burden of bereavement is on him. And this loss is surely uppermost in his mind when he tells Pharaoh that his days have been few and evil. On his deathbed, then, Jacob reverts obsessively to the loss of Rachel, who perished in childbirth, leaving behind only two sons, and his impulse to adopt Rachel's two grandsons by her firstborn expresses a desire to compensate symbolically and legally for the additional sons she did not live to bear. Okay, I mean, I partially agree with what he's saying. I think the reason that the two sons were elevated to tribes is because Joseph is getting the double portion as a firstborn son did in those days, and is actually written into the Torah later on. So, but basically he's saying it's not a non sequitur. Okay, the fact that suddenly he mentions Rachel is because, listen, he's looking at his grandchildren, the grandchildren of Rachel, of his beloved Rachel. He's there with Yosef, his son, the firstborn of his beloved Rachel. So obviously he's thinking of Rachel. It's not a non sequitur at all. It's almost, he's just crying out in pain, remembering his deceased wife who he loved, who was his really the only wife that he initially wanted. Okay, so any comments, any questions? Anyone want to make a comment or a question or ask a question? Please type it in. That's the best way. Or come on to the StreamYard stream and then we can have an actual conversation. But if not, I don't see any comments and I don't see anyone that is expressing to me that they want to say anything. So I guess I'll move on. This is really interesting stuff, isn't it? I mean, it's just gets more fascinating each time you study it. Okay. So Ephrat is near Bethlehem, or Ephrat is Bethlehem, essentially. Even today, Ephrat is a settlement south of Jerusalem, which is right next to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is under control of the Arabs at this point, temporarily. And Ephrat is a Jewish settlement right next to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is also, of course, the place where David is born. And this is why the New Testament goes to such an effort to point out that to move Jesus from Nazareth, right, down to Bethlehem for the birth, right? So they have this, they come up with this pilgrimage idea. And so according to the New Testament, Jesus is born in Bethlehem. And it's important to fulfill the narrative that the Christian Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, just as David, the true Mashiach, true Messiah of and Messiah just means anointed one. So he was anointed. He was explicitly the Mashiach. He was the anointed one. He was anointed with the anointing oil. So it's important to create a false narrative in the New Testament to move the J guy down from Nazareth to Bethlehem for his birth, right? Because it wouldn't be cool if he was born in Nazareth and not said it, because Nazareth has no importance whatsoever in the Old Testament, but Bethlehem does. Right? Let's look up Bethlehem. Let's look that up. How about that? So we'll bring up another Bible hub. We studied Beth El earlier. Now let's look at Bethlehem. Okay. Bethlehem. So I'll just click on Ruth for a second. So this is Ruth, right? So when Ruth came back with Naomi to Boaz, Boaz was living in Bethlehem, and the family stayed there, and eventually David was born in Bethlehem. Okay, let's do it this way. Bethlehem. And let's get our concordance. Oh boy. So this is Genesis 35:19. The first place that Bethlehem is mentioned, that's where Rachel dies. And there it says again that it's the same as Ephrat is the same as Bethlehem. V'tamat Rachel, this is Genesis chapter 35, verse 19. V'tamat Rachel v'tikaber b'derech Ephrata hi Beit Lechem. And she was buried on the way to Ephrat, which is Bethlehem. So Ephrat and Bethlehem are basically the same thing, or right next to each other, or exactly the same. Okay, Genesis 48:7, that's where we are right now. Then it's mentioned again in Joshua 19:15. Let's get the context here. So this is the borders of the land being laid out in Joshua. Oops. That's not what I meant to click on. I'm just going to go to the English. And this falls under the Zvulun. Boundary of their inheritance, blah, 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 blah. Let me just read. Kistot Tabor, etc. Came out of Rimon, turned toward Nea, and then the boundary went around to the north. And in the valley of Iftat-El included were Kata, Nachlael, Shimron, Idala, and Bethlehem. There were 12 towns and their villages. That must be a different Bethlehem, I think. Because Bethlehem is nowhere near the territory of Zvulun. I think that's a different Bethlehem. I could go chase it down and look at the maps of the tribes, so I'm not going to do that right now. So, oh, shoot. One second. How do I do this again? Tab, no, history, recently closed tabs. There we go. Okay, got it back. So let's go back. So that's Joshua 19:15, Judges 12:8. And this is a great way to delve more into the Tanakh. So Judges 12:8. So we have the story of Yiftach, and then Weishpot acharav et Yisrael Ivtzan mi Beit Lachem. So after Yiftach dies, and Yiftach is quite famous, it's one of the famous judges. There's a story where he vows to kill the first thing that comes out of his house and ends up being his daughter. Horrible story. At any rate, after Yiftach dies, then we have three judges who no one's ever heard of. Ibtzan, mi Beit Lechem, Wahi lo 30 banim u 30 banot, Shilach hachutza, Shloshim banot הביא לבניו מן החוץ, וישפוט את ישראל 7 שנים. So here's a guy named Itzban who had 30 sons and 30 daughters and seemed to intermarry with the local tribes, maybe that implies. And then he died. So Itzban, we've heard of a lot of judges like Samson and Dvorah and Yiftach and Samuel. But have you ever heard of Itzban? No, because he gets a mention of only 3 verses in the Tanakh. וישפוט אחריו את ישראל אלון הזבולוני. So then we have someone named Elon, who's the next judge. Have you ever heard of him? Nope. וישפוט ישראל 10 שנים. He judged Israel for 10 years. וימת אלון הזבולוני ויקבר באיילון בארץ זבולון. One second here. So okay, so that's a mention of Beit Lechem. So Ibtzan was born in Bethlehem. Mishpot acharav et Yisrael Avdon ben Hillel, and here's the name Hillel in the Tanakh, right? So it's not a rabbinical name, even though Hillel is famous for being that one of the progenitors of the Pharisees, right? The house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, but it is actually a biblical name. Hillel Piratoni, so from some place Piraton, I guess. ויהי לו 40 בנים ו30 בני בנים, רוכבים על 70 עיירים וישפוט את ישראל 8 שנים. So then Avdon ben Hillel, the Piratoni, was the next judge. And then he died. Piraton. And then we have Samson. So between Yiftach and Samson, one second. One second. Right. So between Yiftach and Samson, we have 3 judges that no one's ever heard of. Yitzan, Elon, and Abdon. Okay? And Yitzan was from Beit Lechem. Okay, well, that doesn't really give us a lot of information about Beit Lechem, but it is an interesting quick dive into the book of Judges. So let's go back to here. Judges 17. Let's see what we have here. 17:7. So here we're told that Bethlehem is in Judah, not in Zvulun, in Judah. So there are 2 different Bethlehems, because the previous one, remember, we saw that Bethlehem was given to the tribe in the book of Joshua, was given to the tribe of Zvulun. But here it says Bethlehem in Bethlehem Yehuda, that Bethlehem is in Judah. So there are 2 different Bethlehems. The one we're interested in is the Bethlehem in Judah. Okay, so what's happening here? Let's go to the English for a second. So this is Judges 17:7. Okay, so the story of Micah. A young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah who had been living within the clan of Judah left that town in search of some other place to stay. Oh, so this is where the Levite comes and steals Micah away. On his way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. Micah asked him, "Where are you from?" "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah," he said, "and I'm looking for a place to stay." Then Micah said, "Live with me and be my father and priest, and I'll give you, when someone else steals Micah's priest away, and I'll give you 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes and your food." Then Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in his house. And Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since the Levite has become my priest." And Micah was not a priest; he was a Levite. This Levite was not a priest of Yehovah. He was a priest of one of the foreign gods. In those days, Israel had no king, and in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle. We're in Judges chapter 18, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. So the Danites sent 5 of their leading men from Zorah and Eshtaol to spy out the land and explore it. And these men represented all the Danites. They told them, "Go explore the land." So they entered the hill country of Ephraim, and they came to the house of Micah, where they spent the night. When they were near Micah's house, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. So they turned. Remember that young Levite was originally from Dan, right? Said. No, I'm sorry. Levite was from Bethlehem. That's the whole reason, from Bethlehem. That's the whole reason we went here in the first place. So they turned in there and asked him, "Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? Why are you here?" He told them what Micah had done for him, and he said, "He has hired me, and I am his priest." They said to him, "Please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful." The priest answered them, "Go in peace. Your journey has the Lord's approval." So the 5 men left and came to Laish. It's where they basically conquer this foreign town of Laish and kill everybody for no reason, where they saw that the people were living in safety like the Sidonians, at peace and secure, and since their land lacked nothing, they were prosperous. Also, they lived a long way from the Sidonians and had no relation with anyone else, meaning easy to be conquered. When they returned to Zorach and Eshtaol, their fellow Danites asked them, "How did you find things?" They answered, "Come on, let's attack them. We have seen the land and it's very good. Aren't you going to do something?" I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So when the 5 men went into Micah's house and took, so now the soldiers of Dan who are attacking Laish go into Micah's house and they take the ephod and the household gods, showing that this priest was not a priest of Yehovah, but of other gods. The priest said to them, "What are you doing?" They answered, "Be quiet, don't say a word, come with us and be our father and priest. Isn't it better that you serve a tribe and clan in Israel as a priest rather than just one man's household?" The priest was very pleased. They took the ephod, the household gods, and the idol and went along with the people. Putting their little children, their livestock, and their possessions in front of them, they turned away and left. So the Danites steal Micah's priest away, and then Micah comes after them, or Micah and his guys come after them, and the Danites said, "We'll kill you if you go any further." So the Danites went their way, and Micah, seeing that they were too strong for him, turned around and went back home. Then they took what Micah had made and his priest and went on to Laish against the people at peace and secure. They attacked them with the sword and burned down their city. There was no one to rescue them because they lived a long way from Sidon. So the people of Laish were all alone and had no relationship with anyone else. The city was in a valley near Bet Rehov. Danites rebuilt the city and settled there. They named it Dan after their ancestor Dan, who was born to Israel. The city used to be called Laish. There, the Danites set up for themselves the idol, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. They continued to use the idol Micah had made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. So not a very nice story, but the whole reason we got into this is because the priest who came to live in Micah's house was from Beit Lechem in Yehuda, in Judah. Okay, so let's unwind a little bit here. So we just have mentions of Bethlehem, of Beit Lechem. Oh God, I really hate having a cold. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I can get rid of this. It's been on. Excuse me for 1 second. Oh. Here's Lavi. Where's Soup? Soup's out the back. Okay. All right. So, all right, back we go. So far we just have random mentions of Bethlehem. Right. Pelegish mi Beit Lechem. So this is a horrible story. Judges 19:1. So I'm not going to go through the whole story, but this is basically the last. This is what leads to the destruction of the tribe of Benjamin at the end of the book of Judges. And what have we here? And it came to pass in those days that there was no king in Israel again, and there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side. Sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took him a concubine out of Bethlehem. Okay, let's read this in the Hebrew. So whenever Beit Lechem in Yehuda is mentioned, it seems, or not whenever, but often it says Beit Lechem Yehuda, which would seem to distinguish it from this Beit Lechem that we saw in the book of Joshua, this Bethlehem that we saw in the book of Joshua, which was one of the cities acquired by the tribe of Zvulun. So it would seem there was more than one Bethlehem, and the Bethlehem that we're talking about, or that we're interested in, is Beit Lechem Yehuda, the Beit Lechem that's in the tribe of Judah. Okay, at any rate, we have this whole story now about how this Levite's concubine is killed by the Benjaminites. Is raped and then left for dead. Ah, it's so horrible. And so here, you're welcome at my house, the old man said. Let me supply whatever you need. So he's inviting this Levite with his concubine in, and this is now in Giv'ah, within the tribe of Benjamin. Don't spend the night in the square. So he took him into his house and fed his donkeys. And so this is clearly referring back to the Sodom and Gomorrah story as a theme. But at any rate, after they'd washed their feet, they had something to eat and drink. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city of Giv'ah, the Benjaminites it's talking about here, not the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, surrounded the house. Pounding on the door, they shouted to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." Exactly the same as Sodom and Gomorrah, right? The owner of the house went outside and said to them, "No, my guests, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here's my virgin daughter and his concubine." So again, exactly like in Sodom and Gomorrah, where Lot offered his daughters. So he offers his daughters, this person living in Giv'ah. "I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do that to them whatever you wish. But as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to them. So the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them, and they raped her and abused her throughout the night. And at dawn they let her go. At daybreak the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight. When her master got up in the morning and opened the door of the house and stepped out to continue on the way, there lay his concubine, fallen in the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let's go," but there was no answer. Then the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. At any rate, then it goes on to say how he cut up the concubine and sent him out basically as evidence, or to stir up the anger of the people of Israel. To make a long story short, they go and attack the tribe of Benjamin, killing it except for, was it 400 or 600 people who they left of the tribe of Benjamin. Basically, this horrible incident causes the rest of the tribes to basically all but annihilate the tribe of Benjamin. So Beit Lechem is mentioned as a place where this Levite was from, who had the concubine. Okay. And that's all in Judges. Then we go to Ruth. So Beit Lechem Yehuda. Again, we have Beit Lechem in Ruth. We have Beit Lechem Yehuda. So it would seem that whenever Beit Lechem are Bethlehem, the one where Rachel was buried, the one that's the same as Ephrat is mentioned, it seems to refer to it usually as Beit Lechem Yehuda. And we have that again in Ruth 1:1. So in Ruth 1:1, so in the days of Judges, basically, there was a famine in the land. I'll just read the English translation here. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. So this is talking about Elimelech and Naomi, right? Elimelech and Naomi were the parents of Machlon and Gideon, and their wives were Orpah and Ruth. And so Elimelech was from Bethlehem in Judah. And so this is essentially the story of David's line, right? So then we have a whole bunch of mentions of Bethlehem with regard to Ruth. Ruth again. So all of the story of Ruth, aside from when they're in Moab, when they come back to the land of Israel, takes place in Bethlehem. Right? So let's just look in Ruth chapter 4. So one thing we notice, one thing that's different between Bethlehem and, let's say, Bethel, is that Bethlehem doesn't have any sacred element to it, right? Bethel had a very sacred element to it. Okay, Jacob, on his way out of the land of Canaan, leaving his father Yitzhak's house, he didn't build an altar there. He set up a stone, standing stone, essentially. On his way back, I think then he built an altar. We saw, and God appears to him twice in Bethel. Once when he's leaving the land of Israel, and once after he's come back. On his way back in, God confirms that his name is no longer Jacob, but now it's Israel. Bethel is called the house of God, the Sha'ar Shamayim, the gate to heaven. And so Bethel is a sacred place for Israel in a certain sense, right? It's a holy place. Bethlehem is not a holy place, and in any way, we haven't seen anything connected with any kind of altars or appearance of God or anything related whatsoever to any kind of cultic worship or anything that would distinguish it as a religious place, so to speak. It's just a place. There's a Beit Lechem near Nazareth. Huh. Really? Well, that's obviously that. So maybe that's the one that's being referred to in Zvulun as being of the tribe of Zvulun. But clearly it's not the one in the New Testament where it says that where Jesus was born. Let's take a look for a second at the New Testament out of curiosity. Shall I put up a disclaimer? I never ever want to be confused as a Christian. Please note, we are. Fortunately, there are other Karaites who have poisoned the well, and if you look at the New Testament, even for a second, someone may assume that I am a Christian. God forbid, in any way, shape, or form. We are studying the NT as an historical source only. I am not a Christian or messianic in any way, shape, or form. Thank you, unnamed Karaite, for making me have to publish this little disclaimer here. So now, with that disclaimer up, we can go to the New Testament and see. So we can go to Bible Hub again. Paul, do you know, is there any indication whatsoever that when it mentions that Jesus is born in Bethlehem, that it's speaking about a Bethlehem near Nazareth? Yeah, but maybe he was born. If there's a Bethlehem, there are two Bethlehems we've noticed that are mentioned in the Tanakh. One within the tribe of Zvulun, which is near Haifa and which is not far from Nazareth. Remember when we were up in that area in Haifa in Nahariya? Yeah. Right, for sure. Well, let's take a look at Matthew for a second. Right, they want to make it seem like he was born where the Messiah is supposed to be born, right? Right. Exactly. So yeah, it's clear. Joseph and Mary, home is your wife, blah, 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 blah. As Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea. So here they specifically say, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born, King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Okay, so it does explicitly mention here Bethlehem in Judea. All right, so let's leave that alone. I can get rid of my disclaimer. So, right. So we're in Ruth 4:11. Let's go look at the Hebrew here. Oops, what did I click on? Maybe just to make it easier, I'll just read it quickly in the English. And if we need to refer to the Hebrew, we will. So it's 4:11. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May Yehovah make the woman who's coming into your home like Rachel and Leah. Again, a reversal of the firstborn. Leah was born before Rachel, but Rachel is mentioned before Leah. Reversal. Because, of course, Rachel was the favored wife of Yaakov, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrata and be famous in Bethlehem. So we know Ephrat and Bethlehem are essentially the same. They are the same. And so we have this parallelism between Ephrat and Bethlehem again, very common in the Tanakh. Through the offspring Yehovah gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Peretz, who Tamar bore to Judah. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. When he made love to her, Yehovah enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, praise be Yehovah, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons has given him birth. And then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The woman living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Oved. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So Ruth gives birth to Oved. His father is, of course, Boaz. So Boaz, Oved, Yishai, and David. And then we have the entire family line here. So that's it. So that's really the significance there, that's the line of David. And then in 1 Samuel 16 and 17, so now this is getting down to David himself. And let's look at that very quickly, and then we'll get back to our parsha. I'll do the English again. So here, God says to Samuel, right? Samuel is the last judge over Israel before Shaul is king. Samuel just remains as prophet. Hold on a second. I just have to close the window here. The sun right in my eyes. Ready? Whoa. Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've chosen one of his sons to be king. So there we go. But Samuel said, how can I go? This is 1 Samuel chapter 16. And Ariella says that's where they twist the story. Right. Exactly. We found it when we were in Nahariya. Yeah. Yeah, Nazareth is right. When we were in Nahariya a couple of years ago, we wandered over towards Nazareth, which is very close to Nahariya, maybe half an hour, approximately, if even. Maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, I would say, approximately something like that. So yeah, it's in that general area of Nahariya, correct? And so there's another Beit Lechem around there. So maybe, well, I don't even think Jesus was from there. He's probably from Nazareth. And they had to move him down to Beit Lechem for his birth. Right? So what was the pretext? What was the pretext they got Jesus down to Beit Lechem? What the heck were his parents doing in Beit Lechem?
They said that they made up something about a census that the Romans were doing, that everyone had to go to Bethlehem to be counted in the census.
Everyone had to go to Bethlehem to be counted in a census by the Romans. Where is that? In Matthew? Interesting. Well, if you find it, then I'll post it. If not, those kinds of censuses never happened. Why? Okay. Anyway, they ended up moving Mary and Joseph down to Beit Lechem so that Jesus could be born in Beit Lechem, because that's where David is from, right? So, okay. Anyway, back to 1 Samuel chapter 16. Yehovah said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to Yehovah. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" I guess it's not good if a prophet comes, maybe he has bad news. In 40 days, the city will be overturned or something like that. Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace, I've come to sacrifice to Yehovah. Consecrate yourselves and come to sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." At any rate, all of the sons of Jesse come out. We'll skip ahead a little bit. So Samuel asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There's still the youngest." Jesse answered, "Oh boy, my battery's about to run out." Okay, I'll get the charger in a second. "There's still the youngest." Jesse answered, "He is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then Yehovah said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the spirit of Yehovah came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah, which is near Bethel. So that's that. Okay, so that's where David was anointed. David was chosen. So Samuel comes down. Samuel was told by God to go down to Beit Lechem in Judah. We saw in the book of Ruth, that's where David's family is, right? That's where Elimelech and Boaz are from, and the descendants. And so David is born in Beit Lechem. Go down to Jesse of Beit Lechem, and then David is chosen and anointed for the first time. He's anointed a number of times, but he's anointed for the first time in Beit Lechem. So that's where the Mashiach is anointed, right? Rise and anoint him. This is the one. Now, David didn't become king immediately. Then he goes on to to be Shaul's arms bearer. But at this point, he basically, he's chosen officially as the one. He's going to be king. He's anointed as future king over Israel. And now there's a whole process where Shaul is hudach. He's pushed out of his position and eventually dies along with his son Yonatan, sadly. And David is moved in as the new king. So the original Mashiach, right, the first true king over Israel. Well, Shaul was the first true king over Israel, but the the progenitor of the Davidic dynasty, meaning David himself, of the eternal kingly dynasty over Israel, was anointed as, and the word in Hebrew for anointed is Mashiach, right? You can even see this in the Hebrew here, if we were to go to the Hebrew. So the Mashiach, the very first Mashiach of the Davidic line, is anointed in Bethlehem in Judah, which is why Jesus has to be moved on down to Bethlehem for his supposed divine birth. Okay, let me take a break for a second. I'm going to put music on. Let's take a 5-minute break. I hope you're enjoying the study. I certainly am. I just love these studies because there's just so much to explore, and I find out new things every time I study. I learn so much. Teaching is one of the best ways to learn, and I hope that you listening in will also ask your questions and get involved. I never like this to be one way. I always like it to be a conversation. In fact, I love when a couple of people come online, come on the StreamYard link, and we have an actual discussion. But that's not happening today, so no big deal. Let me put on music for about 5 minutes while I set up the charger, take a drink of water, breathe a little bit, and we'll continue with the study for about another hour after I come back. So here we go.
נפשי לך כאן במה, לזכור תמימה, קיים הבטחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה. בצל תפילתי כמו קורבן נחשון, ויום מנוחתי ברינה וששון, חביב קבעתי שון ברוב הצלחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה. ישחה קיווינו ידיר אדירים, בן דוד מלכנו שלח נא לעברי, ויקר אל הדרומים רווח והנחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה. אנא עליון נורא הביטה עלינו, פדנו במהרה, חננו חננו, שמח נפשנו באור ושמחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה. חדש מקדשנו זכרה נחרבת, טובך מושיענו תנעלה נצבת, בשבת יושבת בזמר ושבחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה. זכרו קדוש לנו בזכות יקרת היום, שמור נא אותנו ביום הזה ובכל יום, דודי צח והיום תביא רווחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה. כל רינה וישועה לישראל השמיעה, בבוא חזיון תשוע, צום מצמיח ישוע, אור שמשי הופיע, תמיד הזריחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה. שבת, שבת מנוחה. יום זה לישראל אורה ושמחה, אורה ושמחה, שבת מנוחה. יום זה לישראל אורה ושמחה, שבת, שבת מנוחה. שבת, שבת מנוחה. כי ישמר השבת אל ישמרני, כי ישמר השבת אל ישמרני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני. עשו מצוא חפץ, עשו דרכים, גם אם נדבר בו דברי צרכים, דברי סחורה, אף דברי דרכים, אגה בתורת ותחכמי, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני. בוא אמצא תמיד נופש לנפשי, הנה לדור ראשון נתן קדושי, מופת בתת לחם משנה בשישי, ככה בכל שישי יכפיל מזוני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני. רשם בדת היום חוקר סגנה, בוא לערוך לחם פנים בפניו, על כן להתענות בו על פי נבוניו, אסור לבד מיום כיפור עווני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני. הוא יום מכובד, הוא יום תענוגי, לחם ויין טוב, בשר ודגים, השמחים בוהם שמחה משיגים, כי יום שמחות הוא ותשמחני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני. נחל מלאכה בו סופו להחריב, על כן נחבס בו ליבי בבורי, ואתפללה אל ערבית ושחרית, מוסף וגם ממך הוא יענני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני, אותי לעולמי עד בינו וביני. דרור יקרא לבן עם בת, וינצורכם כמו בבת, נעים שמכם ולא יושבת, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת. דרוש נביא ועולמי, ועוד ישעשה עימי, נטע שורק בתוך כרמי, ששבת בני ימי. דרוך פורה בתוך בצרה, וגם אדום אשר גברה, ותוץ צרי באף ועברה, שמע קולי ביום אקרא. אלוקים תן במדבר הר, הדס שיטה בראש תדהר, ולמזהיר ולנזהר, שלום ימתן כמי נהר. הדוח קמאי אל קנה, במוג לבב ובמגינה, ונרחיב פה ונמלאנה, לשוננו לחרינה. דאי חוכמה לנפשך, והיא חתר לראשך, לצור מצוות אלוקיך, שמור שבת קודשך. דרור יקרא לבן עם בת, וינצורכם כמו בבת, ועם שמכם ולא יושבת, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת. יום שבתון אין לשכוח, זכרו כריח הניחוח. יונה מצא בו מנוח, ושם ינוחו יגיעי כוח. יונה מצא בו מנוח, איי איי איי, ושם ינוחו יגיעי כוח. איי איי איי, יונה מצא בו מנוח, איי איי איי, ושם ינוחו יגיעי כוח. היום נכבד לבני אמונים, זהירים לשומרו אבות ובנים. חקוק בשני לוחות אבנים, מרוב עונים ואמיץ כוח. יונה מצא בו מנוחה, איי איי איי, ושם ינוחו הגיעי כוחה, איי איי איי, יונה מצא בו מנוחה, איי איי איי, ושם ינוחו הגיעי כוח. ובאו כולם בעברית יחד, נעשה ונשמע, אמרו כאחד, ופתחו וענו, השם אחד, ברוך הנותן ליעף כוח. יונה מצא בו מנוחה, איי איי איי, ושם ינוחו הגיעי כוח, איי איי איי, יונה מצא בו מנוחה, איי איי איי, ושם ינוחו הגיעי כוח. דיבר בקודשו אל בהר המור, יום השביעי זכור ושמור, בכל פיקודיו יחד לגמור, חזק מותניים ואמץ כוח. יונה מצא בו מנוחה, איי איי איי, ושם ינוחו הגיעי כוח, איי איי איי, יונה מצא בו מנוחה, איי איי איי, ושם ינוחו הגיעי כוח. העם אשר נקע צאנתה, יזכור לפוקדו ברית ושבועה.
Okay, we are back. And you're taking Levi into the into the final home stretch of this week's Torah study. So let's do this. Let me stop this. Quiet you. And we go back to let me share the screen differently. Share screen. Share screen. Oh my God. Okay. There we go. And we are back. And Ariella is back, I hope. Hello, Ariella.
I hope so. Seems like the internet's cleared up a little bit here, so I'm trying again.
Good. Hola. So, would you like to add anything to what we've been saying or studying so far?
No, it's been very interesting, this study of the two Bethlehems and the Ruth journey and the whole bit. Very good. I'll stop you if I come up with a question.
Sure.
But I will
Absolutely.
put my
Sounds
mic
good.
off because there's a lot of background noise here.
Yep. So, very briefly, you guys are doing okay there in Colombia, right? Not Guatemala, Colombia.
Yeah, we're in Colombia and we're doing well. Staying with someone for another week probably while we're still looking for something for ourselves.
Very nice. So you plan to be there for the long term, for the long haul?
Yes, it looks good. Everything looks good here, and with my Spanish ability, it's working out. And the people are very laid back, very protective. Once you know them and their heart is open toward you, everybody protects each other. So it's kind of a nice thing.
Wow, that is pretty cool. It's a shame that, you can't live in Israel, but I totally understand.
I believe that it will clear. Absolutely. It was such a disappointment to find out what was going on there, but at this time in our life, it's not easy to go out and protest and do all the things that needed to happen there. So anyway. Right,
sure. Now they're talking about, again, let's see, what's the latest? They closed off all the malls. Actually, I think it was delayed, but Bennett wanted to close off all the malls to the unvaccinated. And now he wants to shut down all travel into the country. He wants to basically hermetically seal the country once again. So basically no one can go in or go out.
Hideous. Absolutely.
And this is not a way to live as free Israelites on our own land. It's just sickening.
That's right. It really is. It's like we listened to your impromptu talk on the Hasmoneans and the Hanukkah and what was going on there, and how it's just repeating itself again.
Yeah, yeah. And I hate to say it, but as much as I was not a fan of Netanyahu, and especially he instituted the lockdown for the first time in Israel. He hermetically sealed the borders. He did all of this stuff. I think Bennett is going to be even worse because Bennett he reminds me of a little dude that needs to prove himself, like a little tyrant.
Yep, absolutely. That's what he appears to everyone that I know. He's just got to prove himself and get popular with the nations, and
right.
It's like as if he's just going along to get along.
It kind of reminds me of, Netanyahu was established in his position. He was older than Bennett. He had all these connections all over the world. He was in with all the world leaders. He was in with Trump at the time, even though Trump recently said some, basically told him he can go screw himself. It was in the headlines. But at any rate, Netanyahu didn't need to prove himself as much. This guy Bennett is trying to establish himself on the world stage. He wants to be a long-term leader over Israel. He's grasping onto his position. He doesn't know how long it's going to last. He needs to, show he's tough. He's younger. He's not as mature as Netanyahu was. And so that's a typical reaction, is to act as a tyrant. It reminds me of Rehoboam. You remember the story with Rehoboam, where he goes to the elders and he asks them, how should I, after Solomon dies, how should I rule over this nation? And the nation comes and says that the tax burden was too great under Solomon, and what should I do? And the elders advise him, if you listen to them and reduce the taxes and do what they ask, then they will be loyal to you for their entire lives. And then he goes to, it says the Na'arim, basically the young ones, the people his own age, I guess, who we grew up with. It says the ones he knew from his youth, and he asked them, what should I do? And they say the famous line, what is it? My father gave you spiders, and I will give you scorpions, or something like, I can't remember the exact, but basically he says, I'm going to make the situation even worse, right? And in the end, Yerovam ends up listening. He says, okay, that makes more sense to me. And he listens to the youths, and he takes their advice, and he ends up being a tyrant because he feels that this is the only way he can show his power over the country, with an iron fist. And what ends up happening is that Yerovam revolts, revolts against him, and the entire 10 tribes of the northern 10 tribes, leave. They basically revolt and start their own kingdom, start their own country. So it's the same mistake over and over again, by thinking that by ruling with an iron fist and being a tough guy, that you're going to win followers, when in fact what you do is you antagonize people and they end up throwing you out.
I always had this question about Yeroboam. He was given, one of the prophets actually told him he could take those 10 pieces of the garment, whatever, and go with it. He was giving him the blessing to go ahead and take the 10 tribes out, but then immediately he builds a golden calf. It's like, who didn't know what was going on there?
I guess Yerovam himself, it's funny because we were speaking about this earlier today in the study, and actually I was speaking about it in another video I did this week, because often the rabbis are compared to Yerovam by Karaite commentators, and
all right.
So it seems the same thing, that he wanted to, well, he wasn't being a tyrant per se, but what he wanted to do was establish his own places of worship and his own holidays, so that the northern kingdom wouldn't need to go to Jerusalem.
Right. Right, so and here we are with the same political situation. Netanyahu wasn't a good king, and now Bennett is doing worse and building his own system of paganism.
You could put it that way. At any rate, it's really a shame that we can't live in Israel on our own land, as free people, that we live under these tyrants who seem more interested in appeasing our enemies so that they can appease the goyim than they do in really, setting up a nation of Israel for the people of Israel.
Absolutely, giving the land away to the Arabs now, allowing them to buy an Area C. All of the things that they're doing and as we were traveling around the last 6 months, we were finding huge areas where they've expanded the Arab population. They're just going to push Israel into the sea by buying up the land.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and it's funny because Netanyahu, as much as I don't like Netanyahu, I think Bennett is actually worse but one of the things that Netanyahu warned about and has criticized the government since then is that this is going to be the most left-wing government ever, because even though Naftali Bennett pretends to be right-wing, he's in bed with all of these leftist parties,
Totally.
and so he's not going to be able to, So it's very sad. So he's the guy who's supposed to be the most right-wing, and actually he ends up establishing a government which is far more left-wing than Netanyahu's government was. See, Netanyahu was a seasoned politician, and he knew how to play the game. He can yes him to death, but then do what he wanted in the end. And so he kind of kept things under control. I'm not saying he was great or anything. All I'm saying is Naftali Bennett, because he's inexperienced, because he's built a coalition that's essentially a broad coalition with a lot of left-wing parties in it, that he's going to be a lot worse, and so far it's proven to be a lot worse than Netanyahu.
It has, definitely has.
Right. So, but hopefully someday we can live on our land and get our inheritance and not have to live in apartment blocks and cities and fear for our lives rises. And all of this crap.
High rises with no land to plant even one little plant. Everybody's crammed into these huge, expensive apartments that you can't live in.
Yeah. Well, what are you talking about? You can plant the geranium on the terrace.
Yeah, you can plant a few geraniums, but to live off the land, no way.
You can fill your terrace with dirt, and raise a couple of cucumbers, maybe a tomato.
Yeah, no, that's what we were doing. We had a balcony, and we had quite a bit of square feet on that balcony, but it a box for tomatoes and cucumbers and jalapeno peppers, things, but you can't live off that.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, it's funny because the king of Morocco, who wanted to woo Moroccan Jews back to Morocco, basically made the same plea. He said, listen, you used to live, in big houses on the land, in villages back in Morocco. You went to Israel, you lived in tents, and then now you live in apartment blocks in crowded cities. This is not this is not the way to live. Why don't you come back and live like human beings, like you used to back in Morocco? That was basically his pitch for the Moroccan Jews to come back to Morocco. He wants the Jews to come back to Morocco.
That's interesting. Wow, that Morocco. And actually here in Colombia, the land is like Garden of Eden everywhere. It's absolutely beautiful. And this is what Israel's supposed to look like. I mean, obviously it's suffering still under the exile.
Right. Well, Israel is very beautiful, but it would be more beautiful if the Arabs didn't burn down half of it every summer.
Yeah. Yeah, burn it down, and then where is the land flowing with the rivers everywhere? That's got to happen, but it hasn't yet.
Right. Yep. Any rate, all right. Well, I guess we should get back to the Torah study.
Yes, let's.
Yes, it's a good idea. So, all right. So we were speaking about Bethlehem. Let's see if there's anything else more to say on the subject. So we saw in 1 Samuel, and then it goes on and on. Okay, I think we're going to end this section on Bethlehem. But let's see if there's anything else. Jeremiah. 1 second. Ezra, 2nd Chronicles, 1st Chronicles, anything in the prophets. Samuel. 1 second here. 1 Samuel, 2nd Samuel. So let's look just very briefly at 1 or 2 more things. So we have in Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Let's read in English to save a little bit of time. Yeah, so marshal your troops now, city of troop, blah, blah, blah. Verse 2, but you, Bethlehem Ephrata, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. Therefore, Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor bears a son and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites, etc., etc. So really, this is as far as I could see, the only prophecy that the future Messiah, well, it's not even really talking about the future Messiah coming from Bethlehem. All it's saying is, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel. So basically, it's just talking about a descendant of David. It's not even saying necessarily that that person has to come from Bethlehem. This is just referring to a future ruler, a future descendant of David who will be reestablished on the throne. But I would imagine that this is where the Christians get their idea that Jesus had to be born in Bethlehem, so they had to do the old switcheroony on him and get him real quick from Nazareth down to Bethlehem. This might be the very verse that we're relying on. Micah 5:2. Let's see what else we have. Jeremiah 41:17. Again, I'll just do English for a second. And what do we have here? No, this is just mentioned in passing. Okay, so this is the exile. This is when they flee to Egypt, and they just pass by Bethlehem. So that's Jeremiah. Nehemiah doesn't have any prophecy, really. Ezra doesn't have any prophecy, just mentioning it in passing. Nothing there. Chronicles, no. Chronicles, no. 2 Samuel, there's no prophecies there. Yeah, end of days prophecies, I should say. What? My cat is up on the... Lovey, what do you want, sweetheart? Why are you up on the table? Go. Bulk, you want to let him out in the back, maybe? Well, then don't. Then put him in the back room or something like that, okay? Bethlehem, and then we're back to 1 Samuel. So really, as far as I can see, the only end of days prophecy regarding Bethlehem is right here, is Micah 5:2. That's it. There's no other end of days prophecy regarding Bethlehem. And so what does Micah 5:2 say? V'ta Bethlehem Ephrata. And you, Bethlehem Ephrat, remember Bethlehem and Ephrat are basically the same thing, are the same thing. Ta'ir lihiot be'alfei Yehuda. Though you are small among the thousands of Yehuda, mimcha li yitzeh lihiot moshel. From you shall be for me one who comes out to be a moshel b'Yisrael, a ruler in Israel, a mot'u motza'av mekedem mimei olam, and his descendants from ancient times, from the days of old. So there it is. That's the prophecy that the future ruler will come out of Bethlehem, but it doesn't mean physically out of Bethlehem. It just means will be a descendant of David, the reestablishment of the Davidic dynasty. But as I said, I would imagine this is specifically where the Christians decided, or the writers of the New Testament decided to to do the old switcheroony and move Jesus real quick down to Beit Lechem to be born instead of Nazareth. So that's that. So Beit Lechem really, as we said, has no religious or cultic significance at all, unlike Bet El. Its main claim to fame is it's where Rachel died and was buried, and it's where Ruth and Boaz had a family, and their descendants eventually led to David, who was in Beit Lechem. So that's it. That's that. Okay. Let's unravel a bit and go back to Genesis 48. So, yeah, wow, that was a long detour, but that's okay. We can go for about another half an hour or so, and then I'll end the study. Verse 8. Yar Yisrael et bnei Yosef. So we're back in Genesis chapter 48, verse 8. Yar Yisrael et bnei Yosef. So Israel saw the children of Joseph. Yomer mi el, and said, who are these? Yomer Yosef el aviv benai hem asher natani Elohim bazeh. These are my sons who God gave to me here in this place. Yomer kachem na elai v'avrachem. And he said, take them to me, and I shall bless them. Verse 10, Einei Yisrael kavdu mizoken, and the eyes of Israel were heavy from old age. Lo yuchal lirot, he couldn't see. Oyagesh otam elav, and he brought them to him, meaning Yosef brought them to Israel. Wa yishak lehem, wa yahabek lehem. So he kissed them and hugged them. Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef, ra'o panecha lo pilati. And Israel said to Joseph, to see your face, or seeing your face, I never prayed, I never dreamt of. V'hine hira oti Elohim gam et zarecha. I never even thought I would see your face, and now I'm even seeing your children, you and your children. I'm seeing your children. Beautiful verse. Verse 12. Why yotze Yosef otam ma'im birkav ishtahu la'apar arza. So he took them off of his knees, and they bowed down. They prostrated on the ground. Verse 13, Vayikach Yosef et shneim et Ephraim biyamino, mismolo Yisrael, ואת מנשה בשמאלו מימין ישראל, ויגש אליו. So, from the point of view of Israel, Manasseh is on the right of Yaakov, and Ephraim is on the left of Yaakov, and that's the way it should be. The right always represents, the choice, the first, the power, the strength, or the best, the first choice. And so Manasseh is the firstborn, so he's being brought over to Yaakov's right hand, and Manasseh and Ephraim over to his left hand. Vayishlach Yisrael yemino, vayeshet al rosh Ephraim, v'hu tza'ir. But Yaakov crosses his hands, so he goes, instead of blessing them like this, like this, he crosses his hands, and he puts his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh. Again, signaling the switching of the this inversion, or this exchange of the firstborn for the secondborn, and vice versa. So, verse 14, Vayishlach Yisrael yemino v'yeshet al rosh Ephraim v'hu tza'ir et smolo al rosh Manasseh sikel et yadav ki Manasseh bechor. Okay. ויברך את יוסף ויאמר אלוהים אשר התהלכו אבותיי לפניו אברהם יצחק אלוהים רואה אותי מעודי עד היום הזה. So now he gives Joseph a blessing. So Joseph, later all of the tribes are blessed, including Joseph. But now Joseph is getting a special blessing, along with Ephraim and Manasseh. God, who my fathers walked before, my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked before, the God who shepherded me from as far back as I can remember until this very day. The angel who redeemed me from all evil. So it's interesting now, he switches over from God to the angel. So obviously the implication there is that he's speaking about angels that God sent to redeem him or look after him, which we see a number of explicitly in various cases, right? So, what would be an example? The angel that he wrestled with in Penuel. But it is strange. He doesn't ask God to bless the boys. He asks the angel of God. Unless, I don't know. It's never made sense to me, to be 100% honest. I'm going to look at Robert Alter and see what he has to say. So this is 48:16. All right, we'll just read a little bit back here. Verse 14, he crossed his hands. This image extended in the exchange with Joseph, in which the old man says he knows what he is doing, is a kind of summarizing thematic ideogram of the book of Genesis. The right hand of the father, conferring the blessing, reaches across to embrace the head of the younger brother, and the elder, his head covered by the old man's left hand, receives a lesser blessing. He blessed them, as the Masoretic text has illogically, he blessed Joseph. But them, as the object of the verb, is reflected in the Septuagint, the Syriac, and the Vulgate. Interesting. It's 48:15. No, it is a blessing to, I disagree with that. It is a blessing to Joseph in the sense that he's blessing his children. Children are the representative of the father. But okay, fair enough. Name my fathers Abraham and Yitzhak, let them be multitudinous. Jacob, after recapitulating the story of his personal providence in the first line of the blessing poem, invokes the benediction of the patriarchal line, and then going back still further in the biblical history, the promise or injunction of fertility from the creation story. So that's 16. But he doesn't mention anything there about the angel. Let's see how he translates that verse. God in whose presence my fathers walked, Abraham and Isaac, the God who has looked after me all my life till this day, the messenger rescuing me from all evil, may he bless the lads. Yeah, okay, interesting. So I kind of agree with that translation. Let my name be called in them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, let them teem multitudinous in the midst of the earth. So the messenger rescuing me from all evil. So it's poetic. It's not speaking about an angel. It means a malach, really just means a messenger. So in a certain sense, he's calling God a messenger who rescues me from all evil. not necessarily speaking about an angel, because malach, the real name for angel is malach Elohim, an angel of God. Well, here we're talking about God, so you could say that when it says malach, it doesn't have to use the word malach Elohim, messenger of God. Messenger is enough because the previous verse spoke about God. But I think what Robert Alter is saying here is that God himself is being called a messenger, malach hagoloti, by extension. In other words, he was like a messenger who rescued me from all evil. So the word malach is referring to God himself and not as an angel. It's a bit confusing. I don't know. I have a lot of problems with that one. I'm sure the commentaries go crazy on that one. But let's just leave it at that. Okay. Verse 17. Yar Yosef ki yashit aviv yad yamino al rosh Ephraim v'yira be'enav. So now Joseph notices, of course, that his father has switched the hands, and his right hand is on Ephraim, the younger one, rather than the older one. V'itmocha yad aviv lasir ota mi'ar rosh Ephraim al rosh Menashe. And he actually moves his hand. He picks up the hand and tries to move it over to the hand of Menashe. Verse 18, V'yomer Yosef el aviv, lo chen avi ki zeh habachor sim yamincha al rosho. And he says to his father, you shouldn't do this because this is the firstborn. Menashe is the firstborn, not Ephraim. V'yima'en aviv, and his father refused. V'yomer yadati beni yadati. He said, I know, my son, I know. Gam hu yeh la'am. He also will be a nation, a tribe. V'gam hu yigdal, and he will also be great. Ulam achiv katon yigdal mimenu. But his younger brother will be greater than he is. Uzara'o yeh melo goyim, and his descendants will be a multitude of nations. Speaking about Ephraim, so were Ephraim's descendants a multitude of nations? Well, I mean, they were the leading tribe in the northern kingdom, and the capital of the northern kingdom, which was Samaria, Shomron, was within the tribe of Ephraim. They certainly had the largest inheritance, I would think, Ephraim. So I guess in that sense, yes, many clans came out of Ephraim. So I guess that's the essence of the blessing here. We'll have a large inheritance, and many clans will come out of them. Okay, we'll leave it. We'll let that stand. And he blessed them on that day. Lemor becha yevarech Israel. Lemor. Simcha. Elohim ke'Ephraim u'ke'Menashe. V'esem et Ephraim lifnei Menashe. And he blessed them on that day, and he said, in you shall Israel bless. In you is referring to who? It's not clear. It's either Ephraim or Joseph. It really should say, B'chem Yevarech Israel. It should be the plural, because the blessing is, Simcha Elohim ke'Ephraim u'ke'Menashe. May God make you like Ephraim and Menashe. So really it should be Yevarchem Yomahu lemor b'chem Yevarech Israel lemor yasimcha Elohim ke'Ephraim u'ke'Menashe. Should be the plural, B'chem. Instead it says B'cha, the singular. Well, that could emphasize the fact that it's really speaking about Ephraim as the main point of the blessing, since Ephraim is greater than Menashe. It could also be speaking about Yosef. And I think that's my explanation. B'cha Yevarech Israel. Because remember, the blessing, if we go back to verse 15, Yevarech Yosef. Well, the blessing is really for Yosef. This is a special blessing for Yosef. And so when it says in verse 20, and I think Robert Alter is wrong when he says that it's a mistake. He implies that the Septuagint, because it says in verse 15, He says the Septuagint translates that as, let's go back to it for a second. The Masoretic text has, this is Robert Alter's, oh shoot, I touched the mouse again. The Masoretic text has, illogically, he blessed Yosef, and I disagree, it's not illogical. But them, as object of the verb, is reflected in the Septuagint, the Syriac, and the Vulgate. So let's look at that again. This is verse 15. Yivarech et Yosef. Yomer Elohim asher hitalachti avotay lefanav Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov timedai ad yom hazeh hamalach hago ti mikorva yivarech et anayin v'yikarev hem. Yeah, I disagree. I don't think it's illogical at all. It's really a blessing for Joseph. And how is he blessing Joseph? By blessing his two children. And so therefore, when we get down to verse 20, and it says, Vivarchem biyom ahu lemor, and he blessed them, saying, well, here it says he blessed them, but it's interchangeable, because by blessing them, he's blessing Yosef. By blessing Yosef, he's blessing them. I think that's what's going on here. Lemor becha yivarech Yisrael lemor. So here, Yivarchem, he blessed them. This is verse 20. So literally what it says is he blessed them on that day, saying, in you, singular, Israel will bless, saying, Yasimcha Elohim ke'Ephraim u'ke'Menashe. There's no contradiction here, in my opinion. Yosef and Ephraim, and Yosef / Ephraim and Menashe are kind of interchangeable. So when he blessed them, it's blessing Yosef. And then when he says here, Lemor becha yivarech, that in you Israel will bless, it's speaking about Yosef. Lemor yisimcha Elohim ke'Ephraim u'ke'Menashe. One second here. Yeah. Yisimcha Elohim ke'Ephraim u'ke'Menashe. To make a long story short, there's, seems to be some contradictions between the singular and the plural, but I don't see any contradiction whatsoever. I personally disagree with this statement here that it's illogical. And I think that what's really going on is Yosef is being used interchangeably with his children Ephraim and Manasseh. And that's why we see sometimes the plural being used and sometimes the singular, or sometimes the singular being used and sometimes the plural being used. Okay. And Israel said to Joseph, I'm going to die. This is verse 21. And may God be with you, or God will be with you. And he will return you to the land of your fathers. And I've given you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hands of the Amorites with my sword and my bow. Well, that's an interesting sense. So first of all, is this a play on words? Shechem means a shoulder, literally, but is it referring to giving Shechem to Joseph? And we find out in the book of Joshua that yes, Shechem was actually given to Joseph. So this may very well be a play on words. So you could translate it as, I will give you one more portion than your brothers. But the word here being used is Shechem, or shoulder, which could signify a portion. But it's also, as a play on words, referring to the city of Shechem, which then Jacob says he took from the Amorites with his sword and his bow. Well, he didn't take it from the Amorites. We mentioned this before. I mentioned this morning. Yaakov didn't take Shechem from the Amorites with his sword and his bow. Who did? It was Shimon and Levi. That was the whole story with Dinah, where they killed all the inhabitants of Shechem, because Shechem, the son of Hamor, raped Dinah, right? So did Yaakov, and then Yaakov actually criticized Shimon and Levi, and he actually takes Shimon and Levi he takes Shimon out of the second place and Levi out of the third place. He criticizes them in the blessing that's that's coming up, right? Let's even find that for a second. Shimon v'Levi achim klei Hamas mechorotehem. This is the blessing that he gives now to all 12 tribes. Shimon and Levi are brothers. Klei Hamas mechorotehem. Their ware, their merchandise, are vessels of violence or tools of violence. B'sodam al tavo nafshi. My soul, my being shall not come into their counsel. B'kahalam al techad kavodi. My honor shall not be unified with their another word for council, kind of their congregation. Pam hargu ish, because in their anger they killed a man. And out of will they uprooted a bull, an ox. So arur apam, their anger is cursed. Ki az, because it is so intense, it is so strong. Evratam ki kashata, and their how do you say evra, their wrath? Okay, ki kashata, because it's very hard. From kasheh. I will divide them up in Yaakov. I will scatter them in Israel. Well, that's not a very good blessing, and that's certainly not any praise. If this is the incident that's being referred to here is Shem, which it seems like it is, that's not very good praise for Shimon and Levi, right? So how do we explain that here in chapter 48 that Yaakov says, I'm giving you Shem. He says to Yosef, I'm giving you Shem, which I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow. Well, it was Shimon and Levi who took Shem. And unless there's an incident somewhere else that we're not hearing about. But basically, after Shimon and Levi went in there and razed Shem to the ground, basically, the city of Shem to the ground, Yaakov was worried. Yaakov says to them, what have you done? You're going to turn all the local inhabitants against me. And then he basically gets up and gets the heck out of there. And then he goes to Bethel. He leaves Shem and goes to Bethel. So I don't get this at all, unless it's speaking about another incident, or unless, again, by his sons taking the city, then he took the city, by extension, right? Whatever his sons do, he does. That would also explain the interchange in the previous verses that we saw between the singular and the plural, where Joseph can be used interchangeably with his sons Ephraim and Manasseh, right? So that's one possible explanation, I would say, that when Jacob says, I took Shem from the Amorites with my sword and my bow, well, his sons did it, and even though he's criticizing them and says basically takes away the second and third in command status of Shimon and Levi because of it, nonetheless he's saying, I earned it with my sword and my bow. Well, through his sons, he earned it with his sword and his bow. That's one possible explanation. Another possible explanation, I don't really see another possible explanation, but I'll give a secondary explanation, which is that there's another incident where Yaakov takes Shem, comes back and takes Shem, and it's not reported in the Torah. That's another possible explanation. But I'd go more with the first explanation. It's kind of interesting, right? And of course, those who think the Torah is, just a conglomeration of a bunch of authors, they would say, well, this is written by one source and the other one's written by another source. Here, where he's saying he got took Shem from the Amorites, that's the J source, shall we say. And the next chapter where he's criticizing Shimon and Levi for destroying Shem, it's not, the incident of Shem is not mentioned by name there. But that those who believe in the documentary hypothesis will probably say, well, that's the E source. Or maybe this is the E and that's the J. It doesn't matter. The point is the same, right? So that's not my explanation. My explanation, no contradiction whatsoever. That the probable explanation here is that when Yaakov says he took Shem with his sword and his bow, he's referring to his children, Shimon and Levi, doing that, raising Shem to the ground. And still, in the next chapter, he goes ahead and criticizes them for it. But his criticism back in the original incident where it happened was not that they did something morally wrong. In fact, they come back and say, should he treat our sister as a whore? But Yaakov's criticism was nothing about you killed innocent people. His criticism, if you look back in the actual incident, is that you're going to the people around here are going to take revenge on me for what you did. So let's get the heck out of Dodge now. And he does. Actually, God tells him at that point to go to Bethel. So it's complicated, but I don't think there's any contradiction whatsoever. And those who do just don't understand the fact that the Torah doesn't work in a kind of, Western Greek linear way, that you can have contradictions. Human beings themselves are contradictions. We're full of contradictions. What's the famous phrase? I think it was an ex-girlfriend of mine many, many years ago used to quote, I think it's Walt Whitman, who says, "Do I contradict myself? Well then, I contradict myself." I think that's in, let's even find that. Song of Myself, 51, by Walt Whitman. The past and present wilt. I have filled them, emptied them, and proceed to fill my next fold of the future. Listener up there, what have you to confide to me? Look in my face while I snuff the sidle of evening. I don't even know what sidle means. He was great. Walt Whitman. I love Walt Whitman. Where's his house? His house is out on Long Island again, right? Somewhere. He grew up in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, because I'm quoting something from him. No. Talk honestly. No one else hears you, and I stay only a minute longer. Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. I concentrate toward them that are nigh. I wait on the door slab. Who has done his day's work? Who will soonest be through with his supper? Who wishes to walk with me? Will you speak before I am gone? Will you prove already too late? Well, I think this right here, I love this quote, sums up everything that's wrong with the documentary hypothesis, where they try to find these so-called contradictions and they forget this Walt Whitman quote. Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Let's even post that. Oh, I don't even have the right screen sharing option. Let's try this again.
Is it possible, Melech, that the fact that Levi and Shimon were also instigators in the sale of Yosef, I don't know if he ever found that out, but they seem to have a temper problem, evidently, and a resentment problem. I'm sorry.
Was it Levi? Now I have to go back and remember. Was it both? Let's see. That would be in Genesis around 44 or so, 45, let's go 44. Okay, so Genesis 30. Joseph dreams. Okay, so here's the whole story. I'll do it in the English just so we can look at it together. So, okay, so here we go. As you know, your brother, blah, blah, blah. So something goes, blah. Joseph arrived at Shechem. So here comes the dreamer. They said to each other. So the brothers say to each other, doesn't mention Shimon and Levi. Reuben heard this, tried to rescue them. So Reuven tried to rescue them. And then Judah said to his brothers, let's sell them to the Ishmaelites. So I don't see anything here about Shimon and Levi.
The only thing that, I mean, I'm not sure exactly where that is, except that when when the brothers came to Egypt, he chose Shimon to put in jail. And I don't know if there's just kind of an underlying thing that those guys instigated or what. And they also had to be, I don't know, and the very fact that Yosef goes to Shechem also seems to play in here. He's going to Shechem at that time. He's now given, at the end, he's given Shechem as his heritage. So interesting stuff.
Okay.
I don't know what all can be pulled together from this.
Okay. I think I remember learning somewhere also that it was Shimon and Levi, but if I remember correctly, that comes from some kind of rabbinical midrash. And it's not anywhere in the text.
Oh no, that would be bad, wouldn't it?
Well, it's not bad at all. It's common. It happens to me all the time. And that's why it's always important to check the text. So I think I also remember learning that in yeshiva somewhere. Well, let's see. Let's look it up.
Yeah, if you look on Bible Hub, it should have some kind of reference to Shimon somewhere. Shimon.
Well, I don't think it's anywhere referring to Joseph. I mean, I could look that up, but his name will appear so many times. I'll just have to spend an hour going through all the references. I don't remember anywhere that Shimon and Levi team up to get rid of Yosef, but maybe it's in the rabbinical writing. So I'm going to Google it and let's see what we got.
That could be.
Yeah, here we go. Wait a second. So in the rabbinical writings, see here. Here, the classical rabbinical sources argue that Shimon was very fearless, but also was particularly envious, and so had always been antagonistic and spiteful towards Yosef, owing to Yosef being Jacob's favorite son. The Midrashic book of Jasher argues that Shimon was the one who proposed that the brothers should kill Joseph, and other classical sources argue that it was Shimon who threw Joseph into a pit and became furious when he found out that Judah had sold Joseph rather than killed him. According to the classical sources, Shimon suffered divine punishment for this inhumanity with his right hand withered, but this caused Shimon to repent, and so his hand was restored a week later. So that's it.
Oh my.
In the biblical Joseph narrative, when Joseph, having settled in Egypt, asks his brothers to bring Benjamin to him, he takes Shimon hostage to ensure that they return. According to classical rabbinical sources, Joseph chose Shimon to be the hostage because he was concerned that if Shimon was not separated from Levi, then Levi and Shimon might destroy Egypt together since they had already destroyed Shem. Another theory was that Joseph singled out Shimon due to his taking a prominent role in Joseph's betrayal. However, Driscoll points out that there is no mention of this in the narrative. According to the Midrashic book of Jasher, Shimon was not willing to become a hostage, so Joseph sent 7, blah, 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 on and on. So, yeah. So there's nothing nothing
there.
in the Tanakh.
No.
It's just rabbinical stuff. Right?
That's right.
Polite way of putting it,
Yeah.
rabbinical stuff.
Rabbinical, I like to call it rabbinical gobbledygook.
Gobbledygook. There you go.
Yeah. So that's that. But it's important. I mean, it just goes to show how when we've learned Judaism through the rabbis, which we all did, including ourselves, how much junk was piled in to our minds, which is not, then it's very difficult to separate it out between what actually happened and what the rabbis say happened. And, because when we're taught one and the same, right? The Torah is taught together with the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Midrashim and the Rishonim and the Achronim, et cetera, et cetera. So it all gets jumbled together. And so we get these things in our mind that we're sure happened are mentioned somewhere in the Tanakh, and they're not. And I cannot tell you how many times it's happened to me, first of all. But one of my favorite things, excuse me for 1 second, let me just close WhatsApp here, it's bothering me. One of my favorite things is when I'm arguing with rabbinites and they'll say something that I know 1,000% is not in the Torah, that's from the rabbinical writings. And I like to just say, oh, can you find me the chapter and verse for that in the Tanakh? And I just like to watch them scramble. I know they're not going to find it because it's not there. And it's just fun to watch the look in their eyes turn from, like hope, from hope to insistence to desperation to ultimately, complete abject failure, and they come back to me with their tail between their legs and say, oh, I was sure it's in here somewhere, So that's, it's always good for a couple of laughs. But
yeah, we had an incident like that. We had an incident like that where there was, I can't remember what it was now, but I actually wrote to the Chabad Ask a Rabbi, and and I said to him, can you tell me exactly where that is in Tanakh? And in the end, he just turned around and refused to answer me.
Yeah, they usually just block you at that point or start insulting you.
Yeah, that's what he did. He said I didn't know what I was talking about, and we're not going to go on any further with this.
Exactly.
Okay.
No, I'm not going to argue with an idiot like you. Of course not, right?
Yeah.
Even though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though you're right and he's wrong, but it's funny. It's funny sometimes. It's like it's the equivalent of taking it's the equivalent of taking a rabbi's nose and sticking it in his own poop. They don't like that.
Yeah. No, they don't.
They really don't like that. So
but
they
can't kiss a grave.
Something happening countless times. So, but it just goes to show that first of all, we should never feel like guilty or upset if we mix a lot of the rabbinical stuff or some of the rabbinical stuff with the Tanakhic stuff, because it's so common. It still happens to me. Although I've kind of over the years gotten an eye for it. I know when it's when I can smell rabbinical BS a mile away these days. But
yeah, you're getting good at that.
Yeah, you get good at that after a while. But it still happens to me, and it's a good lesson, because when you do look it up and you see it's not there, you learn something. You learn something new. Oh, I thought this was in the Tanakh, and now I know it's not in the Tanakh. Sometimes it's just as important to know it's not in the Tanakh as it is to know what is in the Tanakh. So, all right. So that being said, so we're in Genesis 48, and I'll go, I think, for another 5 or 10 minutes, and then I'm going to end the study for today. So back to Genesis 48. Yeah. So we just had, the end of 47. Yeah. I'm sorry, 49, right. And now we have the blessings. And the blessings some of them are quite complicated. A lot of them use words which are very rarely used in the Tanakh. It's very poetic. It's typical of Tanakhic poetry. A lot of the translations for some of these words are speculative. For instance, this verse right here, maybe I'll focus on. Maybe we'll end with this, because otherwise we'll just be going on forever. In verse 22, so this is Genesis 49:22. Ben Porat, Yosef ben Porat, alei ayin banot sa'ada alei shor. So a fruitful son is Yosef, a fruitful son, and then alei ayin. So there are a million different explanations for this. Banot sa'ada alei shor. So ayin is usually a well or a spring. In fact, I lived in a place called Ain Kerem, the spring in the vineyard. Beautiful place. And yeah. So, but well, let's do some of the different translations to give an idea of what we're talking about here. So that's Genesis 49:22. We'll go to parallel.
Melech,
Yeah,
can I
spring.
ask a question? quick question. A fruitful son is Yosef. Usually when they talk about a fruitful son, they're referring to fruitful as in progeny.
Right.
And yet Yosef had very few compared to the rest of his brothers. Just
Right.
Ephraim and
Well,
Manasseh.
Yes,
That we know
but
of.
two things to say about that. Number one would be that when it refers to progeny, it's not only speaking about the first generation, but all of the descendants. And so it's really speaking about the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, which
Gotcha.
did become, Ephraim especially became the one of the leading tribes in Israel. So I don't see a contradiction there. But then the other thing to remember is that this is not a statement of fact. It's a blessing. So it's a blessing that Joseph should become, right? Of course, blessings, especially on deathbeds, are generally fulfilled. They're considered like a bit of prophecy in a sense. This is very prophetic, these blessings, right? It says what's going to happen in the future, essentially. But then again, it's not a statement of fact that already happened. It's a blessing of hope for the future.
Okay.
A blessing of
Thank
prophecy.
you.
Yep, you're welcome. So Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. So that's the NIV translates 49:22 is Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. And the NLV translates it as Joseph is the foal of a wild donkey, at a spring, one of the wild donkeys on the ridge. So what do we see from that? We see they have no idea what these words really mean, right?
Yeah.
You can have two completely different translations, right?
Oh yeah, and this stone Tanakh is saying a charming son is Joseph, a charming son to the eye. Each of the daughters climbed heights to gaze. Completely different.
That's what I learned as well. That's when I first learned this verse many years ago. That's the way we were taught it. That it says, let me find it in the Hebrew.
Wow. Yeah.
That banot tza'ada alei shor. So if you want to interpret it that way, girls crawled up onto the wall. So that's what we learned. And I think this is a midrash that he was so good looking because it says if you remember, it says that he was very, very good looking, right? And that's why Potiphar, his wife, sleep with him, right? So apparently he was a very good
wanted him. Yeah.
The explanation here is that he was so good looking that girls would climb the wall just to gaze at him.
Okay.
Which banot tza'ada alei shor. I mean, I guess it is a possible explanation. I don't think it's a very good one, but that's another explanation that I'd heard. That may be also a midrashic. I'm not sure what the source of that is. That may be a Rashi or something like that.
Easy.
But now we have three different translations for this banot tza'ada alei shor, right? So we have oh boy, let me open up a different window here. How can I do this? So I have to go to Genesis 49:22. Right. Bow by a well, blah, blah, blah. Fruitful son by a fountain. Daughters step over the wall. Young's literal translation. We have three different, right? So the point is, not to make fun, because these are all possible translations. But the point is that it's very poetic Hebrew, and so the commentators and translators really don't know what the heck it means, quite frankly. I'm curious to see again let's see what Robert Alter makes of it.
Yeah.
So this is 49:22.
That would be good. That would be good.
Yeah.
So he says a fruitful son is Joseph, a fruitful son by a string, daughters strode by a rampart. Let's see.
Could you say that again, please, Malik?
So let's see if you can see it on this. Should be able to see it on the screen now. A fruitful son. So this is Robert Alto's translation. He does his own translation. A fruitful son is Joseph.
Okay.
A fruitful son by a spring, daughters strode by a rampart. So he goes with the daughters thing. But let's see if he explains why that's his choice. I'm assuming he does. The morphology, so this is his comment on that verse. The morphology of the reiterated noun in this line is so peculiar that some scholars have imagined a reference to branches, others to a wild ass, right? Those are the things we saw right there. Oops. 50, 49, okay. There is little philological warrant for the former, and the connection between the term used here, porat, and pere, wild ass, seems strained. The main argument for the wild ass is that it preserves the animal imagery, but there are several other tribes in the poem that have no animal icons. A link between porat and the root para, to be fruitful, is less of a grammatical stretch and is encouraged by Yosef's play on the same root in naming his son Ephraim. Joseph and Judah, as the dominant tribes of the north and south respectively, get far more elaborate attention in the poem than do any of their brothers. And then daughter strode, this is another crux, because the verb strode appears to be in the feminine singular, but there are good grounds to assume that the verbal suffix a, which in normative grammar signals third person feminine singular perfect tense, was also an archaic third person plural feminine form. There are a number of instances in which the consonantal text Ketiv shows this form with a plural subject and the masterworks corrected in the Kari to normative grammar, e.g. Deuteronomy 21:7. Our hands did not shed shafcha, this blood. Without emendation, then, the text suggests that Joseph has the twin blessing of fruitfulness and military security. The young women of the tribe can walk in safety alongside the rampart because they will be protected by valorous skill in battle. Verses 23 to 24. By rampart, this is the same word as the one at the end of verse 6. There's scant warrant for extending it metonomically to hillside, as some translators have done. So
that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, it makes some sense. Yeah, I he usually makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm.
He does.
But not
Yeah.
at least sure.
We're gonna have to get.
But again,
that.
it's unclear, right? Because it's poetry.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's poetry. However you look at it, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I looked up.
Yeah.
While you were talking, I was looking up the blessing of Moshe on the tribes at the end of his life, and Simeon isn't even mentioned. I went through them and I couldn't find Simeon at all. But anyway, that's a subject for another day. I think you're coming to the end here.
In 430 years, we'll get to that.
All right, that sounds good. Yeah, 120.
Anyway,
How about that?
Yeah, 120 sounds perfect. Okay, I think I'm going to end the study now because it's been going on for a while, and hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Oh, very much. As
Very
always,
much.
Melech, very much enjoy our Shabbos together.
And Maritza
Same
said
here.
she enjoyed what she could hear of it. The internet's really bad because of the lightning and the rain and everything right now. So anyway, we'll be joining you again.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. So Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. And stay well.
You guys have a great week. You too. Bye-bye. All right, so we're going to end the study here. This has been Hakham Melech Ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, ending the Shabbat afternoon study on December 18th, 2021. Vayechi. Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.